With the recent death of Charles Manson and approaching the 50th anniversary of the horrific Tate LaBianca murders, we speak with a member of the Manson family who breaks her silence for the first time. That's tonight on Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. Dianne Lake was the youngest and one of the earliest members of the Manson family. She did not participate, though, in the infamous murders, but witnessed the aftermath and unwittingly received each of the murderers' confessions. She eventually ended up as a foster child of one of the arresting officers, served as a key witness in the trial that put each of the murderers in jail for life. Dianne's new book is Member of the Family, My Story of Charles Manson, Life Inside His Cult, and the Darkness That Ended the 60s. Welcome, Dianne. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
So you show a lot of courage both to write this book and overcome, obviously, what happened. You've been basically hiding in plain sight for the last 40, 50 years, right? Why come forward, and what's your reason behind it?
Well, it's been nearly 50 years for me. My husband of 35 years died about 3.5 years ago and kind of left a big hole in my life. And I had been thinking about writing my story at some point. People were starting to write my story for me. My perspective was popping up and people were blogging, about it, movie scripts and whatnot. And I decided that this was the right time. And I am a Christian and I wanted to, give glory to God in revealing my story. And there's just, it just seemed like the right time to write the story. And it has helped me tremendously to unburden my soul and to untether me from the shame of being associated.
So the book was catharsis. You feel better about it. Your kids didn't even know at the time, right?
My kids didn't. Yeah, my kids didn't know until around 2006, 2008, about 5 years before my husband died.
Wow. All right, let's go into the story now. What can you tell us? About Charles Manson, what he was like. I mean, you were obviously one of the insiders. What's your take on the guy that we might not know or understand?
Well, he was very much of a changeling. He could become pretty much anybody just in his facial expressions, the tone of his voice. And, he talked about that ability that, he could be from anybody like, the country bumpkin, the bum on the street to, an executive. And he had this uncanny ability to read people, who they were, what their hopes, desires, fears, and then he would prey on that or use that information to become what you needed. So he made you feel very, very special, and that he really could read your mind.
You kind of describe him as a con man. Oh,
he was definitely a con man. He'd pretty much grown up in the prison system, and that's where he learned most of his tricks. I didn't recognize him as a con man, however,
right.
At that age.
Did you, he did not seem crazy or that wild-eyed kind of look that we saw at the end when you first met him? You first were with him?
No. He did not. Go
ahead.
He was like, a hippie, the guru, commune, he was this charismatic musician.
That's actually what I was going to ask, Nessa, when you say it seems a little incongruous to me that it's his hippie commune and he's grown his hair and everything. but at the same time, he's spewing this kind of race hatred, and that there's going to be a racial war and everything. It seemed that like it might stick out a little bit, that it didn't seem right for the hippie culture. How did that hit you?
Right, but see, he'd been on the inside. He'd been in prison, and this is where he learned that, or at least that's what he led us to believe, or led me to believe, that this was information that he'd been receiving for a very long time inside the prison system.
I see. So he had sort of an advanced insight, he thought, which he obviously convinced the women primarily that were in the group. How do you think he convinced women to murder people in cold blood?
No, I have no idea. I really don't. I think that we, through a lot of LSD taking and marijuana, and I think that, but mostly LSD, and I think some of those people that actually committed the murders had been on speed as well. So I think they believed, as I did, in this race war, that this was going, that this was going to happen. I didn't realize that he had any idea about starting it himself, and I don't think he did think about starting it himself until, different things came into play, and then it just kind of, I don't know. I mean, I wasn't privy, I wasn't on the inside of those, of those thinkings, or perhaps I didn't recognize them
let's
at
ask,
the time.
Now, you did not participate in the murders. Give folks a sense of what did you know, and when did you find out about it, or when did you know it?
I knew that the energy level, at the Spawn Ranch and Death Valley had increased in terms of getting into a hideout, looking for this bottomless pit, preparing ourselves for war, with knives, and there were guns and dune buggies and, motorcycles, and, he had a map of topographical map, Forest Service maps, actually. And he was looking for this road. He was looking for an unpaved kind of a secret passage to get to Death Valley. And so that all increased. I didn't know about the murders until we were on our way to the desert. I was with Tex Watson. I'd wandered away from our encampment while we were waiting for the other members to come, but this was not unusual because it was kind of a meeting place before we would all go up to Death Valley together. I came back and Tex had newspapers, and he pointed to the headline, Tate LaBianca murders, and slapped the newspaper and said, I did this. Charlie told me to.
Wow.
And then later on, when we were up in the desert, the girls were, talking to me about their participation in the murders.
We should say you're about 16 years old at this point in time, right?
Yes.
How did the victims get picked, or the houses get picked in particular by Manson?
I don't know. However, there is some correlation in that the Tate house was a house that Terry Melcher had lived in, and they had visited him there. I think Tex and Charlie had visited him there, and Terry Melcher was a music producer, or had something to do in the music business, and he had recorded us, and then it didn't happen. There was no record.
And we should say that Terry Melcher is Doris Day's son.
Correct.
As well.
And then the LaBianca house was next door to another house that we had visited. I don't know if Harold True owned it or if he was just living there with other people, but we had gone there several times, and I know that we had been there for a party.
Was Manson was he at the second murder, the LaBianca murders himself, or?
Well, that's what some other books say.
Uh-huh.
I have no personal knowledge.
You have no personal
of that.
Did you see? Did you see Manson after the murders? Did he say anything to you?
Other than he was going to hang me upside down and skin me alive.
Right. Yeah. That's a good segue into. Let's talk about you for a bit now. Why you were 14 years old, far and away the youngest person there. Why do you think Manson was interested in recruiting you?
I was kind of a disenfranchised, sexually active teenager. Wasn't really welcome at the hog farm, which was a commune that my parents were living at the time. And the leader of that commune, Hugh Romney, had told me in no uncertain terms that they were uncomfortable with my living there, and that, you know, if I wanted to stay, I would need to live in the attic, sleep in the attic, and the reason was because I was jailbait.
So tell us how you get into Manson's gang, cult, I should say.
Another couple that came up to the hog farm, and I believe they were friends of Hugh and Bonnie Jean, offered me to come and stay with them for a few weeks. And I suspect that was all in relationship to my not really being, welcome there at the hog farm. And so they took me to their house, and then I'd been there for a little bit, and they took, a couple of weeks, and then they said, hey, we want you to meet this, groovy guy and his girls, something along those lines. And so they took me to Topanga Canyon, to the Spiral Staircase house, which coincidentally I had lived in previously. And the girls ran up to me, Charlie, Dianne is here. And I had no idea that they knew me. And so that was all very wondrous and surreal to me.
And what do you think Manson saw in you? I mean, did he see that you were a sort of abandoned soul, and as he was as a child, it looks like, which ended up getting him in, all this kind of criminal trouble? I mean, he wasn't normally recruiting 14-year-old girls.
No, but I wasn't a typical 14-year-old girl either.
Go ahead.
I think that he saw me as a young woman, and I saw myself as a young woman, so I'm sure that's what I projected. And I guess the fact that I was just 14 didn't curtail him from wanting me to be part of his group.
And did you feel you'd found your family? Found a family, the family?
I did. At that point, living with my parents wasn't working, and I needed to be loved, and I needed to belong somewhere. And, I guess I didn't think about, returning to, I didn't know how, I didn't have the maturity to think of, knocking on my friend's door and saying, I don't like this hippie lifestyle. Can I live with you? It was just like, no, this was a lifestyle that had been, promoted by Timothy Leary as being, the way to, enlightenment. And so and this is the path my parents had chosen. And so I was going along with the plan.
Now, a lot of people may not be old enough or not remember the 60s as well. You move into this place, and there is just nonstop rampant drug use and sex. Is that right?
I guess pretty much. I mean, that we also, took care, did household duties, but it was not just any drugs. I mean, we're talking about hallucinogenics.
Okay.
Not, when people think of, a drug house or whatever, it's, heroin and speed. And no, we didn't do those things.
But you were taking acid at like 14 or 15, right?
Yes.
How did you avoid, by the way, you don't appear to ever get addicted to any of this stuff, right, in the story?
No, I didn't.
Is there
Praise the Lord.
I was going to say, yeah, so you consider yourself lucky there. Now, the fact is that, so talk about how does Manson kind of indoctrinate and control you, and it ended up being violent too. But tell us about how he sort of went from seducing you to just total control.
I think, just fear, the fear of not pleasing him or being an outcast. Music, most of his songs were all about, his philosophy, of life, living in the here and now, being one with each other. It's a similar, ideology that, the counterculture of the 60s was promoting. But there also was a certain amount of, fear and intimidation. He did beat me. He did, humiliate me.
He raped you basically too, right?
He raped me. What I feel like he raped me, yes, he did.
And this doesn't drive you to want to get away.
Well, I felt like it was discipline, and in the case where where he raped me, I had asked, I had wanted to have sex with him at that time, but not the kind that he offered. So, a lot of like date rape, people are, reluctant to come forward, or, you think,
yeah,
I asked for it.
Yes, exactly. That's it. Yeah. As we're finishing up this segment, what is the significance of Helter Skelter, the term?
The Helter Skelter was the term that was coined after the White Album came out about the race war. It's coming down fast.
And that's
Charlie thought that the Beatles were sending him a message. We're confirming, yes. And part of his whole control was that he thought he was Jesus Christ. His name, man's son. He was man's son. So that kind of got all wrapped up in it.
Now, did you view him as a second coming of Jesus? Were you that into the whole cult? Did you buy it totally?
Yeah, I did.
There you are. You're listening to Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. We'll dive more into the backstory of belonging to the Manson cult in our second segment. Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. All talk and all crime. The nation's biggest murderers were the go-to source for the Moxley murder and the Skakel appeals. Financial crimes on Wall Street. Inside the crimes of Russia's Putin and more. The facts, the forensics, the inside stories. From the host of Business Talk with Jim Campbell, it's Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. All talk and all crime.
Learn more about Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell by visiting Park City Productions 06604's Facebook page. That's Park City Productions 06604.
And we're back with former Charles Manson family member Dianne Lake. She went about 50 years without really talking about the experience, not involved in the murders, but obviously involved deeply in the cult. I get this sense from going back to your youth that you were forced to grow up so young, that your father, I don't know if he suffered from depression, but he seemed to be sort of unhappy and drinking and cheating, and you sort of had to almost act as a spouse to your mother, right? I mean, did you feel that growing up, that you lost a lot of your youth?
Those were tough years. When my father left my mother, and she went off to work to, pay the bills, and I was, trying to help, taking my little sister to preschool, and getting meals together and lunches, and just trying to help. I mean, she carried the majority of the weight, but I did kind of, become the mother while she went off to work and was the dad.
Do you think your father was had a depression problem or something, or just that he needed to be more of a free spirit?
No, my father was an intellectual, and he also, I think, I have a much greater understanding about depression.
Yeah.
And he was definitely depressed.
Yeah.
And especially when his studio, at like the height of his career, he was an artist, burned down. And it burned down because he threw live ashes. He was a smoker. He threw live ashes in the trash. And his studio burned down, and that sent him into a deep depression, I think. In hindsight.
Yeah, well, reading the book, that's kind of what I was sensing, even though, it wasn't listed that he was clinically depressed or whatever, but it seemed like maybe he had some kind of a thing. And, you guys eventually went from basically a home, looking pretty traditional family in Minnesota, I believe, to living in a bread truck.
Well, he convinced my mother to give up everything twice. It was the first instance in Minnesota where he traded our beautiful home for a trailer because he wanted to go to Berkeley and be with the Beatniks and get his master's degree and teach art. Then the car wouldn't pull the trailer. So we ended up in a trailer park, and I don't think that helped his depression there either. And then he got back on his feet, still in Minnesota, and that's when his studio burned down. And that's when he left us. And, he was gone for 2 years, and then we moved to Santa Monica. And it was in Santa Monica that he got turned on to marijuana and LSD. And really, he'd already been listening to Timothy Leary and Allen Ginsberg and Jack Kerouac, even back in Minnesota. But then now he's going to try LSD, and, based on Timothy Leary's, expoundings, and he got hooked up with Oracle, which is of Southern California, and doing art for them. Oracle was an underground newspaper, a takeoff from the San Francisco Oracle, and so they ended up moving in with us. And that's when it was like, oh yeah, let's drop out. We're already turned on. Now we're tuned in. Now we're going to drop out. And two of the guys, my dad and one of the other guys.
And your dad started giving you drugs, right?
Yeah. Well, LSD was like a sacrament back then.
Wow.
It was. This was like the road to enlightenment.
Let me ask you, your mom, who seemed so responsible and kept the family together, she's actually the one that tried pot first and got very hooked on it.
I know, isn't that ironic? Well, I don't know if she got hooked on it, but she thought it was good and brought it home to my dad, and I think that was a feather in her hat because she was always keeping the home fire, lit, and the kids washed and dinner on the table, and he was always, come and sit and read with me. You've got to hear, Allen Ginsberg or whatever. And, and she'd say, oh, I got dishes to do. He says, I'll help you later, but he never would. So, that's, I think that it was a feather in her hat that she's the one that got turned on to marijuana and then brought it home to my dad.
All right. Well, so let's talk now about a little bit more sobering issue. You were molested by your grandfather, right? And talk a little bit about the impact of that.
Well, he took it upon himself to. This is how he portrayed it. Anyway, is that it was time for me to learn about the birds and the bees. That my parents should have done it before or whatever. And I knew nothing, I knew, like most kids, you got married and God planted the seed and, there a baby, was born kind of thing. That's what I believed, and he took it upon himself, and he was definitely perverted in convincing me I should take a bath with him, where he, proceeded to ejaculate and, have me touch him.
And how old are you right now? How old are you then?
9.
9 years old.
Yeah. Totally inappropriate, and then I went home and told my best friend, I had my Barbie dolls sleeping together and told my best friend, and she knew it was wrong. She didn't know either, but she told her mom, and her mom told me, you got to tell your mom about what happened. If you don't, I will. Mm-hmm. So I told my mom.
Now, you're out.
And my father.
Go ahead.
My father and his dad never had a great relationship anyway. So that.
How do you think that after that event, how did that on a long-term basis affect you? I know in the book you say you sort of blamed yourself and there was an emptiness. You were never the same. So it had a big impact on you.
It did. Well, I just felt, I felt like something really wrong and dirty had happened, and that just, I probably should have had counseling then, but that, people didn't do that back then.
Not back then. Now, you're out in California, and it would have seemed cool at the time. Your parents actually write you a note basically setting you free at 14. But really, what you're yearning for is structure, right?
I think so. I mean, I loved school. I really never knew what to do with myself until I started school. My mom said I just loved school. So, yeah, I don't think the hippie life was really, for me.
And you got stuck in it.
And I got stuck in it.
All right, let's go to the Manson family now. Looking at the pictures in the book, and also you say that I guess Manson's mother was a redhead as well. You were a redhead. A lot of the girls to me look sort of alike. Is that kind of purposeful?
I don't know if it was purposeful or just he was drawn to that, that variety. A lot of us, I think, had even Midwestern background, and he did too. So.
So did I.
Yeah. Anyway, I don't know. I mean, I think that that was just brought to my attention really in the writing of the book. It was like, hey, did you realize that, the majority of you were all redheads? And
you looked alike in the pictures. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. By the way, did you purposely not put pictures of Manson in the book? Because there really aren't pictures of him other than the cover. Is that right? Or is that on purpose?
That was a publishing decision.
Okay. Did you have pictures of him when you were there with him at that stuff, or
no?
He didn't allow.
Oh no. He specifically told me not to get my picture taken. But it was a whole different world back then. I mean, people didn't have cameras. If they had cameras, were very special.
Oh, okay.
Probably the little brownie ones. You needed film, you needed money to get film, and you needed money to get it developed. I mean, that was just not something that people did. So I think it's amazing that there are any pictures of the family members. Back then, I mean, it's like we're so into it with our cell phones now that we take pictures.
We take it for granted. I thought maybe he didn't allow any pictures taken of him, and that might be why you didn't have it. But I wasn't thinking that. Yeah, back then you'd have to have had a pretty fancy camera. Who knows what they cost back then? The women now. He teaches basically how to commit violence, how to stab and stuff. And
he did. Yes.
Who is Susan Atkins? Is she the one that who's the one that stabs Sharon Tate and tells you that she found it fun doing it?
I can't remember now if it was.
It's either Leslie Van Houten or Susan Atkins.
Leslie did for sure.
Okay.
But it wasn't Sharon Tate.
Oh.
I remember Susan Atkins telling me that she contemplated saving Sharon's baby.
Sharon's baby. Wow.
Yeah.
Were they making sense to you in terms of why they had done this? I mean, I know the race war and all that stuff, but they've now in cold blood murdered 7 people, I think, in 2 days. And they're talking to you about it, like, within a couple months before everybody got caught. Did they make sense to you?
It didn't make sense. It's like, how could they have done that? These were people that I had loved.
Yeah.
Physically and emotionally.
Yeah.
And it just, at that point, it was crazy. But the way they talked about it, it was like they were kind of proud of it.
Now, you didn't think that it made sense for you to get the hell out of there? I mean, you were there right for that 2-month period before everybody got caught, right?
Right. No, 2 of the girls actually did run away, and Charlie had us beating the bushes looking for them.
That's right. How come why didn't you run away?
Because Death Valley is very remote, and Barker Ranch is even
more remote
than Death Valley. And where am I going to go? And how am I going to get down the wash? There's snakes. And what am I going to do when I get there? I didn't want to go to juvenile hall. I'd been there and hated, that was a horrible experience. Jeez. I didn't want to be in a foster family, and I didn't know where my parents were. So, where am I going to go?
Boy.
What am I,
Let me ask you one of the other women, too, because I remember this from the Gerald Ford assassination attempt. Squeaky Fromm is the same person, right, who tried to shoot Ford?
Yes. Yep.
So, and was she involved in the murders?
No.
No, okay. And I find in the book you described her as childlike, and how did she go from being childlike to an assassin, which was obviously later?
Yeah, no, I think that her, that was like an act. I think that was her, like a cover or whatever. I think that she was really in love with Charles Manson, and she was devoted to him. She may still be devoted to him. She and Sandy, to my knowledge, they had a website. They were still embroidering his vest. They were, devotees to him for many, 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 many years, if not still.
Let's turn to this, because a lot of people didn't know, and I don't think I even knew, but there's a real Beach Boys connection. Charlie gets a relationship with Dennis Wilson. You guys move into the house, right? And it's kind of a turning point because he thinks he's got a chance to be the next Beatles. Manson, this is. Talk a little bit about that.
I don't know about the next Beatles, but Dennis, I think, really adored Charlie. Wow. He was proud to introduce him to his friends, and it wasn't the whole family that moved in to Dennis's.
Right.
A big portion of them, headed up north towards Mendocino. And, I was one of the girls that stayed at Dennis's. I think Dennis is really the one that was encouraging Charlie to be, to get his music out there. They did some recordings together, but they wanted to mold Charlie. They wanted to change him.
Yeah.
and he wasn't going for it. So I'm not, in hindsight, I'm not sure really how bad he wanted to be, a famous musician.
But it does seem in the book that when he doesn't end up getting the record contract and he doesn't want to change, that he really, he became a different person after that. Did I read too much into that or not?
Yeah, no, I think he was very disappointed at that point, but I don't think it was because he wasn't going to be a famous rock star. It's because I think he wanted, at that point, I think that he really believed his spiel about, helter skelter, that there was going to be this war, that, we were going to be like the chosen people and we needed to get to the desert, and he needed money to get supplies and gas. He always, from the day I met him, was a gas hound. He was always looking for gas tanks or ways to fill gas. I mean, really, he was obsessed with gas.
Where did he get this obsession with the Beatles and the White Album from?
He thought that they were
sending him a message.
Sending him a message about helter skelter being this race war and Blackbird, and he played it backwards.
Yeah. So you must be getting to this stage to think the guy's crazy, right, or not?
I didn't, I had disobeyed him. He had left me up in the desert, to, I guess, make it homey or whatever, and maybe to keep me safe or out of his hair. I don't
We're
know.
Running out of time.
But I disobeyed him.
Yeah, we're running out of time with this segment. I want to ask, why do you think he spared you from being, he tried to get rid of you and all this stuff, but he ended up sparing you not being involved in the murders. Do you think there was a reason, or that you were he couldn't control you enough?
Yeah, I don't think he could control me enough. I was unpredictable, had a mind of my own, even though I did, I did believe a lot of what he, was doing or saying about this. I was going along. So
ended up saving your life. We'll be back with our final segment with Dianne Lake. You're listening to Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell.
This is Jim Thompson, host of Mario Lanza and Friends. This holiday season, we're pleased to share Mario Lanza and Friends Christmas special with listeners on AM 1490 WGCH. Tune in on Christmas Eve from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. for the Mario Lanza and Friends Christmas music special on WGCH. You'll hear Sergio Franchi, Placido Domingo, Andrea Bocelli, and many others. Tune in, won't you? And have a very Merry Christmas and a prosperous New Year.
We're back with Dianne Lake, the youngest member of the Manson family. Okay, Dianne, tell us now how you got deprogrammed and, basically brought back to Earth, and even the arresting officer who ends up becoming a foster parent. Tell us that quickly.
Well, we were all arrested up in the desert. I didn't tell them my real name or my real age until they took us to the grand jury to testify. Susan has told her cellmate about the murders and about Charlie, and so they have a grand jury. I go to the grand jury. Just before I'm to go in, the bailiff asked me what my name, my name and age, and I tell him I'm Dianne Lake, I'm 16, and I want my mommy. So I had, come down to earth enough by being in the jail for two months, and I was with the other girls, so I in the same cell. And so we were always being admonished, not to say anything, that, protect Charlie at all costs kind of thing. Yeah. And so once I told them my real name and my real age, they separated me from the girls. And I started, had been reading, I hadn't taken any drugs. I'd been eating good food. I stopped throwing it up. And they made me a ward of the court. They sent me off to a mental hospital, Patton State Hospital, and I ended up being there for 9 months, had an absolutely wonderful healing, learning how to play the flute. I learned how to crochet. I had all these moms and nurses and technicians as surrogate moms. I had friends. They kept me on the receiving ward. I had psychiatrists, psychologists. Really, that was healing. And then Jack Gardner, my arresting officer, saw something worth saving in me. And even though he had two younger, a teenage girl and a younger boy, he took me into his home as a foster child.
Really amazing.
And that helped me get through the trial.
So tell me, you go into the trial now. Vincent Bugliosi is the prosecutor, and he's prepared you and believes you in all this. What was it like testifying with Charles Manson looking at you in the eye?
Oh my gosh, it was fear and trepidation. But he piped up. I had been warned that he had been doing lots of antics in the courtroom, and they asked me if I had loved Charles Manson, and I said, I guess so. And he said, don't put it all on Mr. Manson. She loved everybody. So it's just like, and I realized he didn't have control over me. He didn't get in my head. He didn't tell me what to say. You know what I mean? That's what I was afraid of. And I was also afraid that, the memories of his love and affection in the beginning, would overwhelm me. But he showed me his, antic, irreverent con man, showman side, and it just like broke the spell. And I was like,
broke the spell.
And I just wanted to tell the truth.
Do you think that he or the group committed other murders we don't know about?
I don't know. I don't know. That's all I can say is I don't know. I mean, the fact that they killed it all is shocking to me. So maybe there were, and that's why Paul Dosty, took his dog up there to the desert, and he says that it was because I had told Jack that there might be other bodies up there. Well, there might have been. I don't know. I mean, the desert was a place where miners would, pass through. So, and, people would come and go.
So bringing us up to the full circle, you end up having the stable family and structure that you didn't grow up with. Were you able to forgive your parents, and how were you able to build such a good marriage and successful children, etc.?
Well, I'd seen some of the bottom side of life. I had a wonderful, husband who loved his family, and I forgave. My parents both did 180s. My mother remarried. My father remarried. Ended up with a mortgage, like in his 60s.
Wow.
And all of his friends, were done paying their mortgages, and here he was, he had 20 years left.
Yeah.
So, he had some regrets, and they apologized. They kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater. They got caught up, and just like a lot of other people, I mean, the Manson, murders really ended the 60s, ended that whole flower child, it's like, oh, look what drugs can do.
Yeah, good point. Yeah, brought it into the 60s. You're right on do you now, you're a born-again Christian now. In the book, it's a very central part of your life, Jesus. Do you think that you replaced Manson with Jesus? I mean, that you now still have this devout following of an entity. Do you see it that way?
No.
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 Just purely coincidental almost, as you...
But I praise God for helping me get through that valley of death, that shadow of death. And I'm now, and I kept it hidden for a long time. And just like now with, all this inappropriate sexual behavior by these powerful men.
Yeah, you can relate to that, right?
I can totally relate to that. And you don't want to be associated. You don't want to, you don't want to bring it up, but I was a victim and they were a victim, and that's been a good part of the catharsis of writing this book, is that I realized I was a victim on on many levels.
Many levels.
But I didn't dwell on it. I forgave my parents. Forgiveness is powerful.
Yeah.
Secrets are toxic.
How did you, good point. How did Manson's death hit you?
Very much relieved. It was like, and through these different interviews and people that I've talked to now that I'm telling my story.
Right.
Charles was the boogeyman for lots of young people when, who were 5 or 10. He was the guy under the bed. He was the one in the closet. He was the one chasing the kid on his paper route. It's been amazing how many people I have talked to who he was the boogeyman. So, and I hope for the families of the victims that this brings closure. And let's end this, martyrdom, or he become the icon of evil.
Yeah.
And yes, he was evil, but he got 4 fan letters a day.
Yeah.
He was idolized. Not only did he become the icon of evil, but he was idolized by so many people. Why? So thank God he is gone.
Thank God he's gone, and thank God that you've come through this so well. We appreciate the honesty in telling us this story. We want to thank Dianne Lake for giving us an hour. That book, again, is Member of the Family, My Story of Charles Manson, Life Inside His Cult, The Darkness That Ended the 60s. It's been Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell. Podcast available. You can go to YouTube, search Forensic Talk with Jim Campbell, or Park City Productions 06604. We'll see everybody again next Monday for another edition of Forensic Talk.